Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be discussing the documentary Occupied by Stu Peters. And I would say was interesting. Among all the documentaries that we've covered on Film Club so far, I think this would definitely be classified as one of the more controversial ones that we've covered. And I say that only because the people who put together the film feel free to discuss things that are generally not allowed to be discussed. And they manage to weave together a narrative that connects things in a way that we perhaps have not seen in other ways, in other films, in other books. And one of the things that I faced from the very early days of working on this project. So back when I still had it on my main Stephen Heiner channel before we moved to Palestine Bookshelf last year, was an insistence by some, not by a lot, but by some, particularly in the comments section, about the need to parse Zionism and Judaism, and that was really vitally important because somehow Judaism itself was very innocent. And from the early time, I had fought this on the practical side that there are people who support Zionism without calling themselves Zionists. And those are people who accept the status quo in Israel, whether they live there or whether they live outside of it. That it doesn't matter if you're not a Zionist if you support what Zionists are doing. So very early on, I did not support this idea of, oh, well, if Zionism is the problem, Judaism is not the problem. And let's make sure we're making that really clear, as if Judaism is this wonderful, amazing religion that's done so much good for the world. That's the first problem. Then you have to dig a little further beyond that and say, well, which Judaism are you talking about? If you're talking about Talmudic Judaism, that is something that most of us, including myself, don't really know too much about. The Talmud has passages in it that are so offensive that in many printed editions, some of it is written in code so that if any goyim gets hands on it, they can't read passages in which Christ is referred to as being in hell or Our Lady is referred to as being a prostitute. So Talmudic Judaism arose after Mosaic Judaism, traditional Judaism, you could say, was destroyed after the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies by Christ, and the temple was destroyed by the Romans, and the Jewish people were scattered to the winds. Some of them stayed there for centuries. So the idea that all the Jews were driven out of Palestine is not true. There are plenty of Jews that stayed, but most of them left, and they had to come up with a new form of Judaism. And that form of Judaism had to be opposed to the Christian world order. And so the formation of the new form of Judaism necessarily had to attack Christianity. It couldn't simply stand on the old foundation. And that's why when you see in the documentary, one of the Jews is referring to different things. He says, where is that in the Torah? It's not in the Torah, it's in something else. And he refers to some of their holy books. He says, oh, it's all the same thing. Whereas when Christians say the Torah, when we're referring to it historically as a document, we're referring to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And that's something that's part of our religion as well. And understanding that Talmudic Judaism and tying to what Herzl talks about in the Jewish state, Talmudic Judaism has the idea of the revolt, the refusal to integrate into Christian society, and the carving out of a distinct, non-assimilated identity, for better or for worse. That is how they built that. And so when you understand that Talmudic Judaism, which Herzl articulates as having the Jewish revolutionary spirit, has carved its own path, then some of the tools that it can use vary per country and per culture. So the Jewish revolutionary spirit in Russia was articulated in Bolshevism. which this documentary points out. In Palestine, it was articulated as Zionism. But the idea that, oh, if we solve Zionism, that will solve the problem. No, it will not, because there are other problems. And that's probably what troubles me most about the conclusion of this documentary is this very weak need, uh, silly appeal to humanity. Very Alex Jonesy. Well, what we need is more humanity. I believe in humanity. It means nothing. What does that mean? You believe in humanity. What do people not believe in humanity? The idea that some natural force can be used against this natural force when it is so well organized that the best you can come up with is some decentralized resistance, a la, John Connor and again Alex Jones saying, if you're listening to this, you are the resistance. If you think that is going to defeat a very well financed, very well organized cabal expressing itself in all the sectors of society, you're wrong. This requires supernatural means. So the appeal to humanity needs to wake up and we'll solve this problem is wholly inadequate. And that for me is the biggest flaw with the documentary. There are other things that it brings up which I think are very good and hopeful and useful. But the idea that I believe in humanity and humanity will take on Zionism and will win. Wrong. Even again, if we were to solve Zionism, if Zionism was the only problem, there would be other evils waiting for us because the real battle in this world is within ourselves, the battle against original sin and our worst desires, and the importance of loving those around us and directing our love not only horizontally with the people in our spheres, but vertically to the creator of all of this. That is why we were created. And if you can supernaturalize your view on this subject, things become a lot clearer. But if it's a question of, oh, we just need to get humanity together and we're going to rise up against our occupiers, I just think this is so silly. And that's why I sort of laugh. And sometimes I've wondered, is Alex Jones not controlled opposition? That he just gets people riled up, buys a bunch of supplements, etc. And I have to give Alex credit for some things. He's the one who woke me up on 9/11. But that, again, could just be controlled opposition. He's allowed to say some things, and he's not allowed to say others. If you look at what he used to say about Israel in the early days versus what he didn't say, and then it seems like he's saying again. So I suppose those are the two things I would lead today's discussion with is please miss me with the whole parsing of Zionism and Judaism as if that is vital to discussing this. I don't think that's true. Obviously, Zionism as a governing principle of Israel and as a hallmark of the current Netanyahu government, absolutely. And a quote I didn't know about prior to watching this documentary is Netanyahu on camera saying Islam will bring down the World Trade Center. What a coincidence. Larry Silverstein, in a speech that he gave in Israel, saying that they were looking at redesigning the World Trade Center, and those meetings started in April of 2000. And that's the thing. He feels so safe from the crimes that he committed that he thinks he can reveal after he is also on camera saying, yeah, pull it about Building 7, that he had a design meeting about the new World Trade Center in April of 2000. Well, how could you do that if the towers didn't fall until September of 2001? And how did you know they were going to fall in September of 2001? Another news point that is brought up here, which people have brought up in the comments in previous discussions, is that two workers of Odigo, which was an Israeli company before it was acquired by another Israeli company, I think, they were warned of the attacks. These two employees did not pass that along necessarily to all the other employees, but they were warned that something was going to happen. It was a generally vague thing, but the question again is, how did the person know who notified? And what did they know? So there are larger themes that are explored within this documentary, apart from the things that we've been talking about on the Stephen Heinermain channel. We've been talking a lot about 9/11. So if you're interested in more discussions about that, I would point you towards our film club discussions over there. But now starting to see some connecting tissue, which is something we haven't explored as much on Palestine Bookshelf, between Israel and 9/11. That obviously we can see that Israel benefited from 9/11. And Netanyahu is again on camera saying this, that Israel is benefiting greatly from 9/11, and the quote that Islam will bring down the World Trade Center from Netanyahu. But then the documentary manages to bring out some other unspeakable things, talking about the Rabbi, I think Yarov Roven or something like this. But there's a short, maybe 2-minute clip of a rabbi which has made its way through social media, and you can find it. But he talks about some laws that Hitler passed in his early days, before the Nuremberg laws. And the rabbi is asking this Jewish audience, and they don't know. But he said pornography and usury were banned. So pornography and usury in Berlin were mainly the domains of the Jewish population there. And again, this is a rabbi saying it, right? So if anyone is going to say it's anti-Semitic, I'm just repeating. You can go find this video, and I can link to it later on in a description for this when I have time, or if someone wants to put it in the comments, they're free to. But this goes back to an agenda, which I talked about on today's Film Club over on the main channel, Matt Walsh's What is a Woman documentary. Where does the trans agenda come from? Where does the normalization of homosexuality within a society come from? And part of it was pointing back to this time. So the idea is, of course, you cannot ever say that Hitler did anything good. But the banning of pornography is a good thing. Pornography is objectively harmful to women. It's objectively harmful to our society, and we're watching it corrode our society in front of us. So yes, absolutely, pornography should be banned. Even in a society that doesn't acknowledge God as God, it should be banned. It will be corrosive for your society. And the homosexual agenda, the pedophilia, all of that, and as well as usury. And these two things were banned early on. And the rabbi who's preaching says these were not Jews who were following the faith. He's calling them godless. He used a phrase which I don't know Hebrew, so I can't say what phrase he used, but this idea that they were not godly. These were not godly Jews. They were putting forth this pornography, these gay clubs, this really high usury, and they were using it to destroy the society that they were being hosted in. This obviously leads to then once the documentary has already broken this taboo of talking about anything positive that Hitler ever did, it goes on to talk about a certain historical event that happened in World War II and the possibility of asking questions about it, which, as we know, is illegal in some countries in the world. You can go to jail for asking questions about that, which, as I've always said, if you want to, knowing human nature, there's this idea, don't touch that. That's the first thing that people are going to touch. Don't do that. That's what people are going to do. So if you criminalize something and say you absolutely cannot do this, that is a number one reason for people not only to question it, but to look into it. That if something is true, there's no law criminalizing the disbelief in red lights being red or green lights being green. Everyone just knows that, and if you don't obey it, there's going to be consequences for that. So the idea that you have to pass a law to enforce belief in a certain historical event is in itself problematic, and it will lead to problematic consequences, I think. Something else that was a really interesting discussion, and I generally knew, but I had to do a bit of research while watching, was after I watched it, was the number of Israeli dual citizens serving in the US Congress. Now, interestingly, you cannot be a dual citizen and serve in the Israeli Knesset. And I found an article in Haaretz or the Times of Israel, I don't remember, but it noted that 5 new members of the Knesset, I think this was in 2017, 2018, renounced their citizenships in other countries before taking their oath to join the Knesset. Israel does not allow dual citizens to serve. I applaud that. I also found out there's only 2 other countries that enforce this, Egypt and Australia. And you have to think about the logic of this. Now, I don't take it so far that this can never happen. So the famous use case we have in the United States is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Austrian citizen who became governor of California. Now, California is a state within the US and Austria is a country. I would say he would need to recuse himself from any deals or situations in which Austria had some specific deal with California. He would absolutely have to recuse himself from that. But since California does not habitually have dealings with Austria as entities, then he wouldn't necessarily need to give up his Austrian citizenship to serve as governor of California. So I don't take it so far that you can't ever do that. But if you sit in the legislature of a country, and keep in mind, Australia and New Zealand, there are many things that bind those populations together. So it would be something like a Canadian and an American citizen, the holding dual nationality. I would still agree with the Australian position that if you have dual nationality, if you want to serve in the Australian Parliament, you must repudiate your other nationality, because there's a question of divided loyalties. Are you legislating as an Australian citizen or as a New Zealand citizen? And I say this as someone who is in the process of trying to obtain a second nationality myself. So I believe it. Now, it's not something I have to worry about because I don't plan on going into politics, but I do accept and support the Israeli position of not allowing dual citizens to serve in their legislature. And I think the US should adopt, this may be the only time those words are going to come out of my mouth. I believe the US should adopt the Israeli position on their parliament. You should not allow dual citizens to serve in your legislature. I agree with that. But this was coming from the documentary's point that there are many Israeli dual citizens serving in the US legislature, and that's a problem. And you watch this again, this is a bit of a sideshow with Trump's inauguration, but Elise Stefanik, who is going to be Trump's ambassador to the UN, I think, or is it to Israel? Who knows? Maybe to the UN. But she believes that Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank. These people are just delusional. Leo, have you seen a documentary called Occupation of the American Mind? Leo, would you believe it? It was actually the very first film club that we did for this channel. So if you click on the live tab of the channel and you scroll all the way back to Film Club 1, it was the very first one we did. So second film club we've done with the word occupy somewhere in the name. So those are just some of the things I wanted to cover as far as style goes. The things I didn't like were the high amount of profanity from people like Dan Bilzerian and some of the other interviewees. I'm sure you've noticed this about me. I don't feel the need to use profanity in order to get my points across, and it makes your work less shareable. I am not going to share work that has a lot of profanity in it in public. It doesn't make any sense. It will not reach a larger audience. You want to have something that can reach the largest number of people, and you do that when you make things safe and sanitized. And there's nothing that has been done by Israel that cannot be conveyed in a way that doesn't use profanity. So I suppose just stylistically, that would be something that I had a problem with in the documentary, as well as the conclusion that all we need is for humanity to rise up. I didn't like that, but I did really appreciate something I've personally experienced, and I've shared this before on the channel, the attitude and resilience of the Palestinian people that I've observed firsthand when talking about what's going on. They don't feel sorry for themselves. They don't ask you to feel sorry for them. They just kind of keep moving forward. And you could see that admiration for people who'd spent a lot more time than I had, people who'd lived in the West Bank for years, who shared their perspective on the Palestinians. And that's something I hope to do in the future, is to have more conversations with those people and understand their position better. But from the limited experience and the limited interactions I've had, I've really seen what they talked about, that just wonderful attitude of resilience and ability to move forward. I think there is a censored version. Yeah, maybe we can find that and put that. If you know of it, please put a link in the description. That would be something. Just a whole lot of beeps, I suppose. We'd find. But as I say, a lot of good information that just could be delivered without profanity. Profanity doesn't add anything to it. Not like, oh, I'm so impressed by all the profanity used. That was so profound. It made it so much better. Nobody ever says that, and it just it's unfortunate. But as I say, a lot of good information there, regardless. So, is there anything else that people would like to talk about? As I said, there were a couple moments in the documentary where your eyebrows go up and say, "Oh, we're going to talk about that, are we?" I certainly, as I said, the most controversial film we probably covered in film club. So, if you have any thoughts that you want to share, feel free, as long as it's legal to do so in your country. And if not, as I say, we'll wrap up and we'll leave it for the conversation in the replay for people um, to share links and their thoughts afterwards. Anybody have anything they'd like to talk about? I suppose I hope that you had a chance to watch. That's always the point of film club, is I hope that you've had a chance to watch the documentary, which would then allow you to comment. But if it only inspires you to watch the documentary after, that's just as good, at least as far as I think. Interesting. Thank you, Leo. Is there anything else before we wrap up for today? Okay, well, thanks for coming, everybody. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, please watch it, and feel free to share your thoughts in the replay if you weren't able to join us here during the live.